All right, so this headline really grabbed me. Google Pixel. Apparently, it just rocketed into the top 4 U.S. smartphone brands for Q2 2025. And my first thought was, wow, okay, Google's finally doing it right. This is the big breakthrough, like a real underdog story. But what if that headline, while technically true, is actually just the very tip of this massive, really complex iceberg, like geopolitics complex? So today on the deep dive, we've got these reports from Canalys, 9 to 5 Google, Android Authority. We're going to tear into them. Our mission really is to rip apart that seemingly simple news, dig into what's actually going on behind the scenes, and uncover these, well, pretty wild, unexpected forces that are secretly shaping the smartphone market. It goes way beyond just, what phone you or I might choose to buy.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting moment for Google, no question. But like you said, market share isn't always just a straight line from consumer demand. Not always that simple. There's a much deeper story playing out here. It's one where global trade tensions, manufacturing shifts, these things are fundamentally changing the whole game.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics then. The numbers. Pixel hit 3% market share in Q2 this year. That translates to about 800,000 units shipped, which is a decent jump, 13% year-over-year EOI, compared to the 700,000 they did in Q2 2024. And yeah, that growth pushed them into that number 4 spot in the US. But okay, to really understand that, you got to look at who they bumped, right? TCL was actually ahead of Google before, but their shipments shrank a lot. Down 23% year-over-year this quarter, fell to about 700,000 devices. And it wasn't just TCL, other sort of miscellaneous brands. They also saw a big drop, like 34% year-over-year. Steep declines there. Right, so now let's look at the big players, the context. Motorola is holding steady at 12% share, shipped 3.2 million units, tiny bit of growth, 2% EOI. Then you have Samsung, big presence, 31% share, shipping 8.3 million devices. And they saw this huge surge, 38% year-over-year growth, which the reports linked mostly to their Galaxy A series launches, and then obviously Apple, still leading the pack, 49% market share. That's 13.3 million iPhones shipped. Though interestingly, their numbers were actually down slightly, 11% year-over-year.
Which is surprising for Apple.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Google's 13% growth, I mean, it's good, it's meaningful, but it's actually a bit of a cool down compared to, say, last year. In 2023, Pixel was estimated to have closer to 5% of the U.S. market. So 3% now is, well, it's progress, but maybe not the acceleration we saw before. And remember, last year's Pixel 9 launch, that apparently gave Google its highest ever quarterly sales. So we'll probably see Q3 numbers pick up again, with the Pixel 10 expected in August. So yeah, breaking into the top 4 is a headline. It's a milestone, but it's part of a bigger, more fluctuating picture for them, not just a straight shot up. And that fluctuation, that dynamic story, as you put it, brings us to the really critical question, doesn't it? Why are these market figures acting kind of weird, not always matching up with what you'd expect from just consumer buying habits? And this is where Canalys drops, well, kind of bombshell insight. They're saying these shipment figures, they're not just about sales to consumers, they're being heavily skewed by manufacturers basically racing to stockpile inventory, shoving products into the channel. And why? Because they're trying to get ahead of U.S. tariff policies, the taxes on imported goods. Those policies have been super unstable, so companies are rushing to get stuff in before potential price hikes hit. Right, so think about that Apple number again, down 11% in Q2. Sounds bad, right? But Canalys points out Apple shipped massive amounts in Q1, basically front-loading. So the Q2 drop isn't necessarily weak demand. It's more about timing from that earlier push. And Samsung's huge 38% jump in Q2. Yeah, the Galaxy A series helped, but a big driver was also this strategic focus on stockpiling those devices in the U.S., getting them onto U.S. soil.
Okay, so the big takeaway here for you listening, don't just look at these sales charts like they're simple popularity contests.
Mm-hmm.
What looks like a consumer trend might actually be this high-stakes corporate chess game. Companies are playing defense against potential tariffs, not just offense trying to win your money. It kind of means that the hot new phone getting pushed, its presence, might be less about pure innovation and more about its tricky journey navigating global trade to get onto the shelf.
Exactly. And this whole tariff situation, this volatility, it's causing this seismic shakeup in the global supply chain. Is huge. The most, frankly, astonishing number in these reports is about where phones for the U.S. market are actually being made now. In Q2, only 25% of phones shipped to the U.S. were made in China.
25%. Wow.
Just a year ago, that number was 61%.
61 down to 25 in a year.
Well,
That's incredible.
It's a massive, massive shift in a very short time. And guess who's picking up all that slack?
Let me guess. India.
Bingo! India now accounts for a staggering 44% of all U.S. smartphone imports.
44%. Up from what?
Up from just 13% last year.
Wow. Okay, so that's a fundamental rerouting of where these things are coming from. And is that just one company doing that? Or
No, it's broader. Apple's the biggest example, definitely shifting a lot of production supply out of China and into India. But Motorola and Samsung have also significantly increased their output from Indian factories. So it's an industry trend, not just an Apple thing.
Okay, so this is all being driven by trying to dodge potential tariffs, mainly aimed at China, right?
Pretty much. It highlights the ongoing risk. The Trump administration has sort of floated the idea that all non-US made phones could face a 25% tariff, regardless of origin. Now, whether that happens or how it applies is unclear, but the operating assumption for these companies seems to be that China will definitely get hit harder. We saw those potential China tariff rates fluctuating wildly earlier this year, from maybe 145% down to 30%. It's incredibly uncertain. Honestly, it must be a nightmare for planning. Like running a global logistics race blindfolded, hoping you don't trip over the next policy change. That uncertainty alone is a huge factor. And this whole situation, it really makes you think about the U.S. market itself, how tough it is for challenger brands. I mean, you said it earlier, Apple, Samsung, Motorola make up over 90% of shipments. 90%.
Yeah, that leaves, what, less than 10% for everyone else combined?
Yeah.
Google, TCL, OnePlus, nothing. Everyone fighting for scraps.
Exactly. It's not just a market share statistic. It's like this massive barrier to entry. The U.S. market isn't really a level playing field. It's more like a walled garden dominated by those top three. So for smaller brands trying to break in or grow, it's not just difficult. It feels almost structurally impossible without some major shift.
So, okay, given that reality 90% locked up, what hope is there for those other guys?
Yeah.
You mentioned OnePlus, nothing. Are they just, destined to be niche players forever in the U.S., or is there any realistic way they could actually challenge that status quo?
Well, they're trying different tactics, right? These non-carrier strategies, selling direct on websites, using Best Buy, Walmart, Amazon, bypassing the traditional carrier deals. But their scale right now is still pretty limited in the U.S. And honestly, their success often depends more on how well they do in other parts of the world, like Europe or Asia. To really make the U.S. market more attractive for new competition, you probably need bigger changes. Maybe reducing the huge cost it takes for a brand to get its phones ranged by the big carriers. That's a massive investment. Or perhaps finding ways to incentivize vendors to build out their own retail presence, their own stores. But that's also incredibly expensive. Without those kinds of structural changes to lower the barrier, it's just really, really tough for anyone outside that top tier to gain serious ground here.
Right. So let's try and wrap this up, our deep dive today. It started with Google Pixel climbing into the U.S. top 4, which, okay, technically true, it's a milestone for them. But what we've really learned is that this number, this ranking, it's so tangled up with these huge global forces, trade policies, tariffs, massive supply chain moves. It's not just a simple story of consumers suddenly loving Pixel phones more. It's this complex corporate strategy playing out against a backdrop of, well, geopolitical uncertainty.
Exactly. I think this really shows you how much that bigger geopolitical picture directly impacts the tech market you see every day. It makes you think totally differently about what a market share gain actually means, right? It's not just store sales anymore. It's about tariff walls, manufacturing moving halfway across the world, all these behind-the-scenes factors.
So here's a thought to leave you with. As these global trade dynamics keep shifting, keep evolving, what other surprising changes might we see? Not just in the smartphone market rankings, but maybe, just maybe, in the actual devices you end up choosing to carry in your pocket in the next few years. What unexpected consequences might ripple all the way down to us?